District, that's Adams and Broomfield counties. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to be commenting on the death of Sammy Pickle that occurred on March 13th, 2016 at the Lodo's Bar and Grill at 104th and Federal in Westminster, Colorado. On March 31st, 2016, the Westminster Police Department presented their investigation to our office. I had various members from my office attend that meeting, including Chief Trial Deputies, myself, and the Assistant District Attorney. Westminster Police Department also had various members of the police department at the meeting, and we discussed this investigation. Before I get into the results of the investigation, I think it's important for everyone to know what our filing standards are. On any criminal case that's presented to us, our filing standards are as follows. What is the likelihood of success at trial? In other words, what's the likelihood that we can prove all the elements of the criminal charge beyond a reasonable doubt to a member of 12-person jury from Adams or Broomfield counties? In determining that, if we can't prove one element, we will not file that case. We may send it back for further investigation, or we may say this case may never be filed. In addition, when we look at cases that are criminal cases that are presented to us, we also have to determine whether or not we can disprove affirmative defenses. In this particular case, the affirmative defense that was blatantly obvious is self-defense, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So not only do we have to prove every element of the charge, we have to disprove the affirmative defenses, and the burden of proof is entirely on the prosecution at trial. In the analysis of the facts of this case, first of all, the Westminster Police Department did a very thorough investigation. I am confident that we're able to get to the truth of what happened in the bar that night based on their investigation. A portion of this incident is on surveillance video. The Westminster Police Department interviewed 30 individuals that were in the bar that night. They did a very thorough investigation. As I indicated earlier, this incident happened on March 13th, 2016 at about 12:30 in the morning. Mr. Sammy Pickle was transported to the hospital right about that time, and he passed away on March 15th, 2016 in the early morning hours. An autopsy was conducted, and the results of that autopsy found that his death was caused by asphyxiation due to blunt force trauma to his neck. That is certainly a factor that was considered in making my decision in this case. Other facts that were considered are his height and weight that was determined in autopsy. Mr. Pickle was 6'5" and weighed 370 pounds in autopsy. That's obviously important when you have to prove a case in front of a jury. A jury is naturally going to look at the size of the individuals involved in an altercation. We also interviewed numerous bouncers that were working at the bar that night, just to kind of give you a synopsis of what took place. And again, this synopsis is based on the entirety of the investigation, including the surveillance video. Mr. Pickle was there with a group of friends having drinks at the bar at Lodo's. There was an incident with another group of people, which didn't appear to be anything serious. That incident later arose to a conversation that Mr. Pickle was having with another male individual that was part of another group in the bar. And on the surveillance video, you can clearly see that it looked like a normal conversation between two males. Something was said during the course of that conversation that caused Mr. Pickle to push this other individual away from him. And again, this was on surveillance video. That caused these four bouncers to come towards Mr. Pickle's attention. And again, Mr. Pickle was 6'5", 370 pounds. They asked him to leave the bar. He refused to leave the bar. And on video, the surveillance video, you can see him take a fighting stance, as if he was going to take an aggression towards the other bouncers. Based on the interviews and the video, it appears that Mr. Pickle took a swing at one of the bouncers, and at that point, the bouncers tried to restrain him. All four bouncers were interviewed, and their statements are corroborated with each other, as well as the surveillance video. At some point during this altercation, as the bouncers were approaching Mr. Pickle, one of the bouncers grabbed him from behind, and they went to the floor of the bar. At that point, the surveillance video, you cannot pick up what happens from there. So from that point, I'm relying on what witnesses are saying and happened, as well as the physical evidence that was obtained at autopsy. The four bouncers all gave a statement indicating that one bouncer described him as a mountain, that he was 6'5", well over 300 pounds. They were all in fear for their life, and what they were trying to do is restrain him so that he would not hurt either them or anyone else within the bar. During the course of this restraint, two of the bouncers were on the ground with Mr. Pickle. One was on his legs. The other one had his arms wrapped around him in a bear hug, and he described what he was trying to do is restrain him in what's called a cross-face maneuver. This is his words. He described that was his intent, and that was what he was trying to do. That was going up on that's what was going through his mind at the time he was doing this. It is quite apparent that this was not across Mr. Pickle's face, but across his neck. He indicated that he did this for approximately 45 seconds until Mr. Pickle stopped resisting or stopped trying to get up and stopped yelling, saying that he was going to kick people's ass and do things like that. Other bouncers indicated that it was either from 10 to 15 seconds that this chokehold took place. We know from the surveillance video and the 911 call that when they went to the ground, the time they went to the ground and to the time that we see this bouncer that had this chokehold on Mr. Pickle in a video was anywhere from 2.5 to 3 minutes. So I can't stand here and tell you how long this chokehold took place. All I can tell you that it was certainly less than 3 minutes. And that's obviously a factor in my determination that this is a self-defense case where we cannot disprove self-defense. Some of the things that were discussed during this altercation from all the bouncers indicated that Mr. Pickle clenched his fist, took an aggressive stance that was corroborated through the surveillance video, indicated that I'll beat the shit out of you, said fuck you, threw a punch at one of the bouncers. They all indicated that he was a very much larger man than all the bouncers. To give you an idea, the bouncer that had the chokehold in this incident was 5'11", 200 pounds. So Mr. Pickle had 170 pounds in this incident. They all indicated that what they were trying to do is restrain him so that he would not hurt either themselves or anyone else within the bar. And the individual bouncer that did have him in what he described as a cross-face hold, or what we commonly refer to as a chokehold, indicated that his intent was to hold him long enough so that he could not get up and hurt anyone, because the constant struggle was Mr. Pickle trying to get up and fight these other four bouncers. It's also relevant in our analysis that Mr. Pickle worked in the bar as a bouncer years ago. He's familiar with the role of a bouncer. In other words, when a bouncer comes and asks you to leave the bar, you may want to comply with that. And again, that's consistent with what witnesses indicate happened here. When we talk about filing a case, as I indicated earlier, not only do we have to prove each and every element of the crime, the particular element that's relevant in my analysis here is the mental state. For second-degree murder, the mental state is knowingly. Knowingly is defined as something that is practically certain to cause a result prohibited by law. And so in order to file second-degree murder charges, I would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this bouncer, when he did what he described as a cross-face hold, knew that that would result in the death of Mr. Pickle. That is part of the analysis. The main part of the analysis here is the definition of self-defense. As you all are aware, we are all entitled to defend ourselves. We're entitled to defend ourselves using a reasonable amount of force necessary in order to get that done. In this particular case, if we were to file charges, I would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the force used by this bouncer was not reasonable. And I cannot stand here today and tell you that this is self-defense. But I can tell you that it's very unlikely that we would be able to meet our burden beyond a reasonable doubt if we file charges in this case. With that, I will be answer any questions that you may have at this time. The other three, I can tell you that if you give me a second. As I indicated, the one that did the chokehold was 5'11", 200 pounds. I don't have their size and weights with me now, but I can indicate that they were much smaller. Just by viewing the surveillance video, it was very evident they were much smaller than Mr. That's correct. From the surveillance video, it's very apparent that a conversation was taking place. Something was said that caused Mr. Pickle to push this other individual, and that's what brought the bouncers to the area where they were at. That is not a factor in my determination. Again, we are all entitled to defend ourselves, and this isn't a situation where it's a police officer acting in the line of duty. A bouncer is not a law enforcement officer. So I view this analysis and this investigation as two citizens in an altercation, and what can I prove and what can I not prove. The video is very helpful, obvious. Anytime you're interviewing 30 witnesses that witness an event, not all 30 are going to see the same thing happen. And so it's helpful when you're interviewing these witnesses to have a surveillance video that corroborates what the witnesses are saying, and we certainly had that in this case. We will release the video. I met with the family yesterday and to explain my decision to them. I told them that we would get them to discovery, and I'd like to get that to them first, and then we make it available to you all. Mr. Redmond, do you know what kind of time frame we're looking at? We could probably have it ready for in a week. Okay. The family understood where we were coming from. Obviously, it's a difficult time for them, and we spent about an hour and a half with them explaining exactly what self-defense is and what the charges are and what our burden of proof is. And I'm pretty confident they understood the basis of my decision. Well, I've been doing this now for 24 years plus, and the reason why I'm still doing this is because you do what's right.
Oh,
it would be very easy for me to say, let's file charges and let a jury decide. That's not what I was elected to do. I'm elected to do the right thing, and the right thing in this case is determining what we can prove and what we cannot prove. And if I don't feel confident, and the Westminster Police Department doesn't feel confident that we can prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt and disprove self-defense, I'm not going to file charges.
Is that justice?
I don't know that you can ever say they're going to have justice for his family. I get that asked all the time in the homicide cases that I've prosecuted over my career, and I don't know that there can ever be justice for a family when you've lost a loved one. Again, when you have witnesses that may contradict each other, okay, you still have witnesses that say 10 seconds to 15 seconds. Another witness, the bouncer involved in this, said it was no longer than 45 seconds. What we know from the surveillance video is this bouncer was seen right around 3 minutes after they went to the ground in the surveillance video. And that's why I said we know it wasn't longer than 3 minutes. It was probably much less. Now, if it was a 10-minute chokehold, maybe our analysis would be a little different. But again, the burden of proof is on myself and the prosecution team, and we can only prove what we can prove based on the investigation. I was aware of that, and it did not contribute to his death in this case. We know how much he drank at the bar, but we haven't got the BAC report back from the coroner's office. in the analysis, it's not relevant in my determination. So.
Ben. Sit. Come here. Sit.
Boy, I don't know that. I look at this analysis as two citizens, and what was reasonable and what under the circumstances, and obviously the size and weight of Mr. Pickle compared to the bouncers. I mean, it took 4 bouncers to even restrain him, and he was still trying to get up. So under these particular circumstances, I can't sit here and tell you that it's reasonable, but what I can tell you, it's very unlikely that a jury would find that to be not reasonable under these circumstances, these sets of facts. Absolutely. Each facts of each criminal case that we look at is unique to that facts and individuals involved in that case. Absolutely. The 911 call that we reviewed took place shortly after he went to the ground, which is another indication on how long the chokehold, because during the 911 call, the caller said that he's laying on the floor by himself. Looks like he's still breathing. So it had to do with an incident that took place that I alluded to on the surveillance video. What had happened is there's 2 groups of individuals at tables. A female from the non-pickle group, for lack of a better word, walked by the pickle group and touched Mr. Pickle's rear end. That started conversations, you can see. A member of the pickle group, when the female person who did this walked by him, touched her rear end. And so that's what the conversation was about with Mr. Pickle and the other individual that he ended up shoving. And obviously it looked like, as I indicated on the surveillance video, that they were talking it out. Something must have been said that caused Mr. Pickle to get up and push this individual and start this whole incident. The recommendation that they made in this case was for criminally negligent homicide. And after our discussion and reviewing all the evidence, they were all in agreement that we could not disprove self-defense. The actions that this bouncer took were not a negligent act, okay? And that's why the crime of criminally negligent homicide doesn't fit this particular fact pattern. That's why I said we're really looking at second-degree murder, and if we can file that. That in conjunction with our burden of proving that this was not self-defense, and that's the basis of my decision. The only way alcohol would play a role is, and I don't think it played a role in this particular fact situation, but if someone is being charged with first-degree murder and they're too intoxicated to form the intent to kill, we'd have to look at that and see if we could disprove that alcohol or drugs or whatever the intoxicant is have an impact on that person's ability to form intent. And again, that didn't come to play in this case. There was no signs of intoxication when he was being interviewed shortly after the incident. Okay, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.